He is always on that. Thank you, Frank. And thank you to our friends in Zoom and live and in person. As Frank pointed out, we are going to proceed with this business of the church eventually, but let's talk a little bit more about the Anglo-Saxon people and understanding, of course, that the evidence is, I guess, what the lawyers would call hearsay based on what would later be reported by the Christians, because obviously every kingdom is different. I mean, there's 7 of them, so they had to be so, but we have to assume there is always custom and tradition. So in this case, later, Christian sources would reveal this. So if you wonder, how do we know this? It's simply because later this would be reported by, for example, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. And when you think, is this reliable? Well, what about Wikipedia? Or when I was a boy, the almanac. Remember that? We used to think those almanacs were, I did. I mean, I love my almanac. But the idea is, I don't want you to think that somebody was there saying, well, we meet 3 to 4 times. It's, or who actually was there at these particular meetings. The idea of the ruler or chieftain, whatever you want to call it, maybe a king if you want to dress it up a bit, meeting with their counselors does not mean necessarily that these were regular, but they took place because a king had to depend on these people, as you might say, they're most important. And you will notice that I put high clergy, but you realize that comes after Christianity. And before that, they would have been, I guess, the pagan high muckety mucks. I don't think necessarily we have to be tolerant and say we want representatives from all major faith traditions. I think that's a little post-enlightenment, don't you? I think this is mainly whatever religion we happen to be practicing at the time. I think that is where we want to go with that in terms of the Witton membership. But as far as we know, each king, and remember there were 7 major ones, would have done this, and I suppose they would talk about perhaps going to war, or how's everything going in terms of our resource management. Oh, I'm sure they didn't talk that way at that time or draw charts about GPA and how their economy was going, but they were always ready, presumably, to be on a wartime economy because, what really the value of peace? I mean, if you're a pacifist, great, but most of these folks, I don't think were into pacifism. At least we're talking here, of course, of the ruling classes. Now, the aldermen. These individuals were in charge of the shires. And the shires, of course, are basically what we think of as counties today. The alderman presumably had authority because he was given such by the local people in charge, and the alderman had the confidence of the ruler. king, chieftain, whatever you want to call him. And he represented the king, and as such, I assume he was evaluated and, rate my elderman.com. I mean, it's like they had to put out because they had to be productive, and being productive means be ready for war. And because remember, these kingdoms are all with each other, so there could be a conflict anytime. It wasn't like, gosh, I think there's evidence perhaps of a conflict to come. I think that was sort of like a constant reality. Meanwhile, the famous Thanes fought for the Ealdormen. The Thanes serving in the Fyrd are very important in Anglo-Saxon literature, faithful to their lord, and of course, presumably holders of land, and holders of land because they were fighting for their ealdorman, and ultimately the ealdorman's lord, the king himself. So I was not surprised when my professor named his dogs Thane, because, when Thane would jump on me, of course, I would pet him and, say, I love you, Thane. I mean, the level of sycophancy in graduate school is really disgusting, but yes, Doc's main thing. But yes, it was never like, no thing, not on the furniture. Let's go. No, that's not the way to get a PhD. So all of these things were in the Fyrd serving part of the year, and then I presume regulating their estates and carrying out their own responsibilities the rest of the year. So the army is, as you say, changeable in terms of the members. The shires and counties were led by the sheriffs, and as opposed to our image of the sheriff, which I suppose is thinking about Norma Ray. Now I'm thinking about Jackie Gleason. Yeah, I know. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Yes, that's all here for Burt Reynolds. But the sheriffs of that day were not so much law and order, but CPAs. Yes, IRS types. They're all about collecting because, we have quotas to make. And so they had major responsibilities because, not unlike modern day rulers, they do need lots of revenue. And part of that revenue then had to be provided. And I suppose, I don't want to say this is true, but just speculating, there was some corruption. I know. I don't want to break your hearts, but I'm more or less to note that sometimes they might have not been altogether virtuous, financially speaking, and they paid dearly for it, loss of limbs or other types of punishments. Shires kept being divided, and this was all these counties or shires. They were divided into hundreds and 100 cohorts. I mean, you get into all these records and you think, what do they deal with? Well, they deal with matters not so much involving Thanes and people of that sort, but most of the other people, they're called regular people, supporting cast. Yeah, people who actually work as opposed to fight. And the what you would read in hundred courts records tends to be somewhat pedestrian. I think if you went to, I'm not suggesting you do, the Lee County Justice Center and do a survey, take them a pie or cake and say, why are you here? I mean, it wouldn't be exciting. It wouldn't be like something on HBO or Showtime, not like something you would enjoy, but it would be rather pedestrian. You'd say, oh, well, that's not that interesting. Well, I know, but we can't always produce something that will be exciting. And so hundreds of courts, I mean, stealing somebody's chickens. I mean, it's not going to make the finals. Okay. So the idea then is that much of this is settled by what we consider to be very primitive methods, but went on for centuries, like the ordeals and compurgation, Germanic traditions of settling something by basically asking for divine judgment. May the guilty one get it. And that's how it happens. I mean, it's amazing to think about how many centuries that went on. But it did. And the ordeals, I may have indicated to some of you that some people pointed out that in a way, ordeals worked very nicely because many people, when faced, they had sort of, taken the fifth, as we like to say in our movies, like you think, how the lawyers always tell them to take, but instead the priest will say, it might help if you were to confess, like, or else you're going to hell, man. You're going hell in a handbasket. And then you say, yeah, I did it. Yeah. I mean, I don't know you want to pay top dollar for that advice, but if the priest weren't looking for a tip, a commission, but that apparently would end these cases of ordeals because then you have your judgment. If that's true, and that's only based on the ideas, compurgation, oath taking, and who has the most people who will swear you didn't do it, and you say people have committed perjury. It happens on those shows all the time. I mean, just show me one where people are not perjuring. It's just shocking. I don't mean to spoil the surprise if you believe they were truth tellers, but they constantly are lying, apparently not afraid of the next world. Right. Finally, this is a very imaginary plan. It's kind of like Better Homes and Gardens, and you have some beautiful idea, and you say, wow, this looks great. Dream on, dream on. But this is supposed to be the medieval manor as imagined by authorities in the field. And I note it to you only to give you an idea of how, frankly, inefficient agriculture was back in that day. They went initially from they first had the two-field system. You would leave one part of the land fallow and the other productive. Then they switched to the three-field, with most of the seed eaten by the birds. And we love birds, but they take much of the crop. And like I love to tell the students, no Publix, no Kroger. So It's there, and if it's not there, then you do without. Because remember, the Thanes and the family of the Thanes, they go first at the challenge. So these peasants, we understand, have a hard life. We always think about medieval life being hard, but the masses of people have it harder because we think of Anglo-Saxons, warriors, and all that. Well, that's because who writes the history? The uppers. There are towns like London and what we would call cities, I suppose, but they are not cities in our sense of the word. They are boroughs, to use a medieval word, meaning that they are fortifications, fortified areas that ultimately are going to become urban areas. When there is no use for a city, because, I read that once about how when there's no sense in having a city, there'll always be a need for a manor, people working in agriculture. But to have a city, you have to have business. I mean, you have to have some reason for people to congregate there. And after the Romans leave, most of the cities and towns become deserted because there's nothing going on there. Boroughs then are simply armed fortifications, and only gradually, with the centuries, especially the later Anglo-Saxon centuries, and then, of course, that always famous year. Yes, you're ready, 1066. Yes, and you think the Normans are coming, the Normans are coming. Yes, but we have a long way to go before that, so don't get overly excited yet. It's simply to know that they are responsible for much of the activity, economically speaking, that will come. Speaking of these burrs, or burrs as they're called, burgs, if you like, from which we get the bourgeois, like executives and people who go to these fancy receptions, who get the upper class, people who have bank accounts and live the high life. I don't know that, but you see where they are, and you're thinking, wow, I thought you said it wasn't urban. Well, I'm thinking these are not necessarily major places, but they are not simply agricultural. And you see, look what's happened when you go north and you think, sheep alert, you're right. Yes, be very careful where you're stepping. But notice down south, and I know many of you have been to Winchester, which is a lovely place, and then there's Bath, we talked about that. All of these very interesting places, but it will take a lot of time for these to grow, some of them into cities and some into major towns. All of that, of course, is just part of Anglo-Saxon England. Now, again, as I've said before, and as I'm sure you know, much of this is speculation in terms of their imagination of which places are more important. And you see Hereford there with a black dot, and that means also ran. I mean, you don't quite make a red, but you're on the map. And I don't think the Chamber of Commerce is around to fuss and say, like they do with the U.S. News World Report rating. And you see Northampton, and even, of course, one of our favorites, Canterbury, right there, which we are getting to very, very shortly to understand burghs and then the town. But the burghers, bourgeois, think of all the kinds of words that are derived from that particular root, are connected here. And you said, but what about cities in our sense? Well, probably not yet. Come back to the Industrial Revolution, I'll be ready for. And you say, what about, where's Manchester, Birmingham? I don't think we're ready for any of that. Or further north, all in good time, historically speaking. All right, now we are ready for the real, shall we say, key to understanding medieval England. Because without this, well, I guess that's counterfactual history, but it's unimaginable that we could talk about medieval England and not appreciate the role Christianity played in it. And of course, our hero, St. Augustine. Now, I can promise you that when I heard about him the first time, the professor was very careful to say, now, this is not the St. Augustine. I mean, it's like brand X or, the store brand. I mean, I know that's very hurtful. So, yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, philosophy people everywhere would revolt. You want to take it outside, man, city of God. How about that? Take that. I mean, you think who would really care about this? Yes, you go to a philosophy department and try it out and see what happens. It could be ugly. So this is just the lesser St. Augustine, not to be hurtful, say something that would, but, and he's got a nice hairdo. And he is tonsured, because he did not come to the tonsure late in life, I can assure you. He was a rock solid Benedictine coming to the notice of the Pope of the day, St. Augustine. And as we like to say in the South, bless his heart, he got chosen to direct this. I mean, it's like you say, but a great honor. You get to be a major figure in the Venerable Bede. Yeah, you can say that, but I don't know if he was thinking that way at that particular time. In any event, he got to be a saint, and he has a very important role to play. Although all of this was, as we like to say in Rome, terra incognita, unknown world. Can you imagine if you were a quiet little Roman monk going into what was definitely a new world? But this is what they do. Now, as far as Anglo-Saxons and Christianity go, they're one of those groups, and this is something that might be on a quiz show. Well, maybe not, but it's like, if you were required and you could win money or maybe a big car or mint coat, I don't know. But the idea is, who are the only major Germanic group who didn't convert early on to the papal Christianity? And then you would go, I know, press the buzzer. It would be, of course, the Anglo-Saxons, because they held out in the paganism. Yeah. a lot longer than most of the other groups. All of that does not mean, however, that there had not been Christians in what we call Britain. As I've told you before, while the Romans were around, it appears that some people got aboard the ship over in Roman Gaul, as they used to say on Superman, disguised as a mild-mannered traveler, but secretly planning, conversion. Missionaries. Of course, for a long time, they were illegals. Remember, you weren't supposed to be running around doing this kind of thing. And people representing the famous mother figure Isis or the Persian war god Mithras might be on the same ship, might be going to the same dinner or meeting with the captain. I don't know, whatever they do on these ships across the channel. And, you talk about the weather or, gosh, this is really exciting that we're going over to Roman Britain. Watch out for those Celts and those Picts. They can really be hazardous. But whatever they talked about, I think you're probably not talking about the Gospels or anything like that, because you never know. Whatever the case, since none of this was legal until the time of Constantine, obviously they were not going to come out with it. But there is evidence of Mithras people, Mithrites, like you could say, ISIS lovers. I mean, come on, come on. I mean, go toleration, right? Not that they weren't all subversives, because they were, because you want to laud Juno and Jupiter, that's okay. But all this exotic stuff, not so much. But then comes the reign of Constantine. Now, the reality may be somewhat different than what I'm saying, because it's hard to imagine that this much of a minority was exactly under control. However, there is no evidence that there was some sort of public display of Christianity, and there were Christian martyrs celebrated during this period of the British Christians. But there were British Christians, and we understand that one of the proud things of British Christianity, and I think you noted this, Frank, it's like they are, and again, try this out Saturday night at a party and see who knew this. You will be, well, maybe shown the door, but let's just say, do you know about the heresy coming from Roman Britain? I mean, they'll be jealous, and affectionately so. And you say, does anybody know about Pelagius? Wow, they'll go, wow. You mean free will? Yeah. Pelagianism will be a no-no for St. Augustine of Hippo, the famous St. Augustine, if I may say. And he was supposedly British. I say supposedly, I don't think they have any evidence of it. And Pelagianism, which was pretty much absolute free will, was a non-starter for St. Augustine and other church leaders. But because he supposedly had British origins, there's a lot of credit that he gets. And then for his homeland. So I just thought I would mention that if you want to hang around with British heretics, you say, are you a Pelagian? Card carrying, I heart Pelagius or something like that. Yeah, free will all the way, man. Yeah, you can always spot them. Because, I mean, it's interesting, shall we say. So, again, many of us think about important dates, and no date could be, well, there are many dates that are important, but the reign of Theodosius is not to be forgotten because of his declaring Christianity as the state religion. And that means, I guess you would call it illegalizing other religions. And there were documents that indicate that traditional Romans were sort of, well, how do they say this colloquially, bent out of shape? Because, I mean, they would say, what about our idols? Can't we have our idols anymore? And I know, it's so strict. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to think about all of those centuries of those idols and the cost involved. Think about that. I mean, those places are expensive to keep and maintain. But all of that seems to have been out, although you want to end idol worship, get busy. You got a lot of work to do. We've been around a long time. So you new folks, you get ready, because this transitional phase, isn't that what they call it? Transitional, yeah. That's going to be a long transition. That occurs, but guess what? The end of Roman authority in Britain is also coming to an end. And as a result, there goes the Christian movement. Because I'm not sure the new Celtic leaders or those picks coming in are going to say, gee, can we go to church together? And maybe then we can talk about predestination versus free will. I really don't think that's an issue. We've got our gods, you got your gods, and they don't like each other. But all of this is to say that once the Romans are out, Christianity is, as far as we know, dormant. It's hard to imagine if you ask somebody, what is the religious picture like? I assume you revert back to their pagan gods, or, well, I'm sure they couldn't be atheists. It's a little early for that. So there is, however, no indication of Christianity except more like nostalgia, the way we were, because there are still, I guess, the remains of churches, and that's going to be very important as we move forward. Maybe this will be a good time for a break. Okay?
Let me pull up a official break clock. It is 3:07, so let us come back at 3:17.
Sounds good.
In Pennsylvania, the little towns are still called boroughs.
Is that
I
right?
come from the borough of Secretary.
Oh my God, so you're a Pennsylvania origin. Oh my gosh, so Pennsylvania, everybody calls it. Yeah. But in Pennsylvania, I mean.
Do the best I can.
Yeah, I know.
I know the definition.
Oh, another book? Oh, okay.
Awful, wasn't it?
It's fine. It took me a while, like that.
Yeah, and I like to.
I'm, I'm in the midst of seeing that right now. Not doing a block.
Oh.
State college.
Yeah, it's no biology. It's all good biology.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting.
Who's the red line?
Made it sound like the gardens were destroyed.
Not this story. One of those. Hopefully not a rifle.
Yeah, that downtown area that we went down, it's not been just little parts of it.
Yeah.
So their whole influence is from
They got-
that is making the Pittsburgh. I think that speaks for itself.
Right.
Has its own language. It's you look up this. It's not like the West Austin. State was right in the middle.
He had a very
And if someone gives you soda, when you're there, you're Eastern. If it's pop, they're always, I mean, seriously. It is.
Pop
He
and
basically was obscure guy.
in the South, they said they wanted.
Great, you are, oh my.
Yeah, they pop and soda, that was totally unknown.
That's really what set him up. When you got your yellow gold. And got to
And it
know
made
nobody.
all kinds of flavors.
That's really funny.
Till they finally put it on.
Stalin realized he had somebody.
That's because my cousin actually owns the pub. It's solid, that's because they and they got me all about. And for the right age, I don't know, so I. Yeah.
Oh my God, yeah.
And so, I mean, right age, you know, Canada wanted to say, such a surround in my Florida.
Yeah.
The auspices, they say it's not.
So I think he was still pretty volatile. Oh, you're like, oh, yeah.
No, but they just, I don't know. You know, they.
That's why I'm talking about this.
Oh, Butler, oh my God, now, Butler will always be on the man, you know, forever.
So when I was there. Decriminalization research. Brought these soul samples to them. Testing. They said, "Here's the pothole from the kitchen." And I look at it, and I think that's the case. Here I am talking to these professors and grad students. I'm well, pronunciation. In my southern drawl. College. And turn it.
Every time.
It's okay. That had a high. What they did. So we were using, like, it's better than my God. Hailing clay industry, they were using industrial.
I don't know why you guys are holding us.
A lot of people like my God. I don't think it is at all.
So now.
Carbon tetrachloride doing all
Done going in the ball game.
Well, in Pennsylvania, man, how much is that they say volume?
Don't say that, Nate.
It's
It used to be a lot.
Yeah. Probably not so much. Didn't have time. He was there, we're considering.
And they still.
Philadelphia, I mean, I think it's big enough a law. And all of it. The big deal.
The way you have to show
That's Philadelphia. I mean, they're down here.
Well, my mother was a little on the suburbs. I'll be on the first thing. So it's.
Oh, yeah.
All from the.
Oh, yeah. It's on like, steel.
Yeah, it was big.
Oh, I know. I mean, that's what you want to say.
Yeah,
That's not.
It's not.
And you know, university is that it's very large.
There's a lot of statues there.
Oh,
There's like 17. Used to be state teacher. Now they're state.
Oh, they're all university. That's correct. That's, you know, that thing is dead. And nobody's calling it unheard of. Everybody's gotta be a. Now, we were in college. Oh, yeah, but we went, remember, we used to be able last time. Did Tuskegee. So that was another. When I was. One of the. Oh, yeah. But basically, that was because of the Auburn connection, you know, it's like when television.
It's all about
getting.
and we knew.
Well, I know you're.
She
Did
changed.
they dedicate some of your. Business going.
Oh, no, she changed the name. In the alma mater. It's
Last weekend. Barely got there.
Becker's High used to say AP.
Ready?
And she changed.
He barely got here.
Little known Auburn, I had no idea.
Well, I know that because I've been studying the history.
He has no cars. He's
So
staying
we're
working
gonna
at
say
spots
that
and
little
Atlanta,
story, she was one.
He did he have to take a break?
And then we're both Alabama graduates.
Yes, yes, they were.
Very good.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think so, all they did.
We're gonna record it. He thinks he'll be there at least in a while. And he's hoping
How did she
put him in the next,
the authority?
next project.
Hey, there were some little gals. Like,
You said it was
long
down
haul,
here.
gold days.
Project.
They did lots of things. They said they had to.
It's tough to see.
I mean, yeah, it was a much smaller place back in that day. But that is fascinating. Yeah, but I knew that she was a big deal, but it wasn't there. What I was talking.
January is, she told me that. She's got like a blog.
Thank you, though.
Yeah.
Gosh, you learned a lot today.
got-
Did you learn a lot today? Yeah. I never had to pay tuition out to, thank them. Pennsylvania information is very important.
It's a big,
Pennsylvania.
it's a big deal for the election.
Oh, my God. Who would have known about that?
Definitely, yeah. And they're just more really.
Well, I know, but you're special. That's why you're not here today.
Yeah, I have spent some time with Wilkes there, so.
Yeah, well, you're doing.
So that was her work So I had to go there for work.
Yeah, but you know it because of your vast knowledge.
Yeah.
The world of engineering.
Are you, are you ready to say?
Yeah, I mean, I assume.
If they are ready.
I can make them ready. It's up to you.
Whoa,
Ready?
He's gonna do that.
power.
Okay, everybody, let us go back to class.
Settle down out there, yeah. Ooh, I did that sound authoritarian, yeah. Yes, oh, Frank's the great.
Well, we already.
Are you ready?
Yes, oh. I guess that's my cue.
I guess I.
I'm just thinking. I could listen to more information about Go Big PA, yeah. The Foy family, yeah. Like I say, the 4th century was a very, very important time. So if anybody wants information about Theodosius and the 4th century, you think, well, he was very important. He was. We can't, as much as I'd like to, elaborate on this very important period, but you think, gosh, as we are thinking about Theodosius the Great, we're getting closer and closer to 476. And a special classmate of yours who couldn't be here today, yes, she would have a lot to say. And that's why she may be valedictorian of this class. I don't want you to be jealous. I just want you to be appreciative of all that she knows. Yeah. Encyclopedic, I would say. Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's such a slur. I'll deal with you later. But in any event, it's interesting to think about the continuation of this British Christian tradition that when they may have been suppressed during this so-called Dark Age by the non-Christian Celts and Picts, we understand that missionaries going into the various other parts of Britain, including Ireland and St. Patrick, seems to have preserved a form of Christianity that was endemic to that part of the world. But like other things that are isolated, people say, well, that's not the way we're doing it now. And we understand that happens. And that certainly happened when we talk about what's called Celtic Christianity. It's more like people tend to develop their own traditions, and some were no longer in keeping with what was going on in, you guessed it, Rome. And that, of course, will be very, very important. You'll notice that the date of St. Patrick's death, 461, would indicate a period, you realize what's coming, 16 years. Yeah, it's coming soon to a class near you. And it's like, what does that mean in terms of civilization? Well, it means they are pretty much alone. And you think about, this is supposed to be a major Irish holiday, but we understand in terms of Celtic Christianity, this was, more or less a kind of isolating figure. And of course, just like a beautiful postcard, we think of these areas up north, and this particular one now 11 years ago representing, or almost representing, Scotland And this Iona, and of course, you just can't create that sort of thing. You have to go it to see it. St. Columba, and because these people had to be amazingly brave to go up there and establish these monasteries, and we assume these monasteries are extremely isolated wherever they were, even though they were there, of course, as missionaries, but they established themselves. And you can imagine that this was and did become a major center of the Christian faith, even though I still imagine it was a minority religion. However, we always understand that these folks are almost like their own agents. It's not like someone is sending them. They're more or less going on their own. I guess they were following what they believed to be the dictates of Christianity, the faith. But when people talk about the Celtic Church, there is no Celtic Church in the sense of an institution. There's simply a Celtic tradition. And so you have these various independent operations that go under the label of Celtic. And that's what makes it so confusing, I think, because there is nobody to report into or turn in, a sort of plan for the next year. What am I doing or what's going on in my area? It's more or less they are operative based on what tradition they come from. So this Celtic Christian tradition, which is very interesting to me, stems from the British Christians and the survival of those ideas as they would develop after the Romans left. So there you have it. And of course, when you read Bede, Venerable Bede, as I hope you will, you'll find out it's not satisfactory to him because Bede says you people are way out of line and you need to get with the program. And what's wrong with being a Celtic Christian? Well, I think it's fine. I mean, I'm all for go Celtic Christian, but if you are Bede, how do you, rate my Celtic Christian? Yeah. How do you give them a good evaluation? Not so much, because bishops are not administrators. They are required to do sacraments. As you know, those of you who are Catholics, there are just certain sacraments that only bishops can do, like ordination and confirmation. But in a Celtic setting, so they say, these bishops otherwise were just harmless monks who hung out under the authority of an abbot of a monastery, which seems interesting. And then suddenly you say, gosh, we've got big ordination coming up, so you need to come on out here. And it seems, in terms of modern Episcopal traditions, the powerful bishop, wielding all the authority in the diocese, that seems very unlikely, but that's what they say the Celtic tradition was, that you need to go out there and do those ordinations and all that. Oh, shucks. I had a big day of prayer and fasting plan. So the tonsures were different. So new dues. If you were Roman, what's wrong with your tonsure there? That, it's that kind of thing. and you say, hey, whatever. Oh, and here's a new word to try out at a party. Does anybody want to peregrinate and see what kind of reaction you get on that one? I always think about peregrination. You want to go find yourself, as we used to. Yeah, I knew somebody like it. I think he moved to California, but yeah. So that idea. But this is the idea of spiritual exile. So in a strict Benedictine way, I think that is a no-no. I think you would get in a lot of trouble. You got caught, get some, like in military school, you get some demerits for trying to peregrinate because you're supposed to stay put. Because you say, oh, well, I was having a long weekend of peregrination. I don't think that's what you need to be doing. But the idea of cohort seems to be that their monasticism is somewhat flexible. And of course, as we know from St. Benedict, that is, well, he had peregrinated when he was younger, but he didn't necessarily approve of it for younger monks. And of course, we never forget the movable feast. The date of Easter. I remember having a student once. Yes, I could write all this stuff down. He said, what day is Easter? And I said, well, now let's go over our calendar very carefully. Now, Christmas is on the 25th of December, but Easter is a movable feast. And I got the inevitable, huh? Yes. That can be very, very complicated, but the celebration of Easter falling on a different date for Celts as opposed to the church, yes, created a problem, big problem, not for the church, but for those Celts. You say, we seem to deal with it real well with the Orthodox now. I mean, they have their day, Catholics have their day, and everybody is just cozy as can be. Well, that's now. This was then. And this was a very, very big deal. As we find out, this is kind of persuasive advertising, like you think, oh, God, I want that. You see it, how beautiful it is. I can tell you about different traditions, editions. You can get it paperback or hardcover, used even. But you but you probably don't want it used. You probably want it fresh. Whatever. But it's always interesting that he is referred to as venerable rather than saint. Although I think there's a large church in Montgomery named St. B. But he is known in history as venerable, which is a lesser grade of sainthood. In any event, if you want to know about the Anglo-Saxon church, this is where you go. It is a major, major source. So it's like, how do we know he's right? Well, there may be areas that something is exaggerated or he's off a bit. But in general, this provides as much information as one can expect for this particular period. And as I told you before, he lived most of his life in a monastery. He did not get grants for research trips or any of that. And it's interesting to think how much he knew and the drawing on the sources. Now, Was he objective? Of course not, because his theme was how God wanted England to be a united kingdom in his rule. And so the church was established. This from the grandson of presumably a pagan warrior. He had many stories to tell, including one about, I guess, what we would call today a mixed marriage. And you say, what's a nice Catholic girl doing with a heathen husband? And you saying, it's politics. This is the famous marriage, famous in medieval history, of Ethelbert the king. And guess what his daughter was named? Ethelberga. Yeah. Little Ethelberga. Yeah, Ethelberga. Yeah. Small fact, but you can tell it to people. Ethelbert marrying Bertha. And Bertha's father was the king of the Franks. Well, I don't need to tell you what that means. Catholic Central. Remember, the Franks were the first people to go Catholic. So they've got some bragging rights. But they were married. But during the negotiations for that marriage, you can well imagine the king of the Franks said, now listen, you're a heathen. I get that. You love idols. Fine. But my girl is a very serious Catholic. And you have got to let her follow her Catholic faith. And of course, to get this deal going, because remember, there is a lot of dowry involved. Yeah. I know. You're thinking romance or something out of it. Yeah. I don't know so much about that, but it was very serious negotiation. And the idea, of course, would have to do with her right to practice her Catholic faith. And as it turned out, in the kingdom of Kent, there was the abandoned church, and you could still see where it was, because it was basically in ruins there in what we call Kent Town, Canterbury. The old church. And apparently she brought her Frankish priest with her, and of course, you know, everything was Latin. So you can't say, well, what am I going to do? Say Mass in English? Well, not worry about that, because it's Mass in Latin, right? Whether you're in Gaul, whether you're in wherever. So there you have the Queen going to Mass. She's got her chaplain. And I guess she kept saying, you know, before bedtime, she would say to the king, you know, you're going to hell, don't you? I mean, we're trying to encourage him. I mean, you know, it's like saying, boy, you are such a loser. I mean, it kind of hurts, but there you are. So it's a very interesting setup, according to me. So there you have, there it is, in case you're ever there in Canterbury. And you can see where that was. I think it's very interesting to think the heptarchy, and you see the various kingdoms. See Kent down there, down south. And that's where they would have been. And she would have, well, I guess she's kind of far from home, but not in relative terms, because she's about as close as you can get in terms of, well, you know, many of you have been there, in terms of distance. In any event, the traditional religion was basically polytheistic and so forth. So it's very unusual, I would say, the relationship of the king and the queen. But according to Bede, they got along quite well. However, apparently those little late at night chats made him begin to ask questions. Maybe I shouldn't be a pagan. I love my idols, but I don't know. I don't know if he's getting disillusioned with the golden calf or whatever happened. Her influence, and you go, aha, you mean he's going to want to do inquiries about the true God? You betcha. The famous story of Pope Gregory as a young clergyman in Rome is a very famous Bede story. So obedience, this is what I call our cult. If you get together with a fellow Bede person, this is probably one of the stories they will tell. And the story goes like this. And it's almost too good not to be true. Even though, of course, Bede wasn't there. But it was certainly a famous story. The story was that Pope Gregory, who came from a very well-to-do family, and I am talking Gregory the Great here. And since my famous friend couldn't be here today, I'll give you the dates, 590 to 604. She could recite that, but Gregory the Great. And you say, but can't Gregory II be the Great? No, only one. Gregory the Great was basically a young, well-to-do individual who became, of course, the famous Pope. But according to this anecdote, and believe me, it's an anecdote, but the story was that he saw young Angles who were being sold at the slave market. And he started being, dare I say it, punny about them. He said, well, who are these people? And he said, well, they're Angles. He said, they appear to be angels. And again, I don't want to stress the punish nature of his statements, but you get the idea. It will go on. The puns, they were from Deira, and say, oh, yes, because they are going to escape the wrath of God, etc., etc. But the story goes that he was so impressed by these individuals who were doomed, not by slavery, but by ignorance, that he wanted to go to be a missionary, but oops, he would get to be elected Pope. So you'd have to send somebody else. I know he got other responsibilities. You know, you want to do all this, but you got to do other things. So that was the idea, and you see him there, the idea, the young individuals who inspired him in this missionary effort. Again, our one source is Bede, and it's interesting. Some people say it may have had to do with what he had learned from Catholic bishops in Gaul who had made him think, because of course, I don't mean to be crude, but I mean, it's like the CEO of this great company, and he thinks God's going to expand. This is a great expansion opportunity. I know but you can see there are a lot of ways to see it, but everybody likes the story And that was the story that Bede would tell. So he waited, and that's how dear old St. Augustine #2 gets picked. Because he wasn't volunteering. I mean, it wasn't like he said, send me, send me, send me. It's like he was a monk there in Rome. And this group of them were sent, and there were 40 of them, so Bede tells us. And after they left, they must have gotten to the outskirts of Rome, and they said, can you go back and just check and ask him, does he really want us to do this? Or maybe we can talk about it. And I think maybe we could use more training, more reason. And I don't think that was a good idea, because Gregory sent them on their way. Because remember, obedience, very big in the Benedictine order. It's not like, well, maybe we can have a discussion or a group hug. No, you're going. And remember, it's not like you just scoot on down the interstate, because, I mean, there would be some Purple Heart opportunities along the way, because there could be some fairly rude people say, gosh, well, if you're with the church, you all come on. I mean, you know, so the idea was maybe some of the Catholic bishops in Gaul or elsewhere would watch out for them. But from the correspondence, again, it's wonderful. We have so many of the letters of Pope Gregory. We do know that there was a lot of interest, shall we say, on the part of the leaders of the church in Gaul in their success. So these fellows got there, and they started talking about Ethelbert, but like, I guess people who take, go to missionary school and get very good and get summa magna and their missionary tactics. St. Augustine and company took it kind of slow with Ethelbert, because you don't want to rush in and say, look, heathen king, you better get straightened out. It was like, wow, you got an interesting set of gods. It's like, sort of the comparative religion approach. And then you keep talking and say, this was really interesting. Maybe tomorrow I can tell you about, we have a Bible with 2 sections called the Old and New Testament. And, it's like that. You want to work and not try to irritate somebody. It's like Kroger versus Publix. It's like they both have their advantages. And so that would have been very, very interesting if we could have heard those conversations, because obviously St. Augustine had a lot writing on this, and it must have gone on for quite a long time. And plus, of course, every night he has to listen to the Queen. Remember that? Yeah. Pillow talk. Yeah. And so, well, what do you think? Damnation or salvation, that's up to you. I hope I don't have to see you in hell, that sort of thing. I mean, so yeah, he's getting it both ways. So we all know, thanks to Bede, what decision he makes. And that makes him the first Anglo-Saxon king to go Christian. And in the naivety of a, I guess, 18-year-old or whatever it was, I just thought then suddenly everybody becomes Christian. And it just doesn't work that way. It was a long, hard process through which conversions would take place. Oh, I'm sure the members of the Witton said, yeah, boss, this is really great. I've heard a lot about that. You know, I think there's some sycophants. Maybe. I know, shocking but true. But the conversion process, because as the old Southern song, give me that old time religion. People they're gonna say, heck no, we want to stay the old way. And that will be tough. But listen, these missionaries are there and they intend to stay and bring about more and more conversions as they go. But again, this interesting pictorial representation showing king and queen will make us understand, and you can imagine that the queen is there cheering him on as he is trying to preach to the leader. But all of this missionary effort would be very significant. So he gets a lot of credit. And yet, he made a very, very bad mistake, a hurtful error. Because what do we do with Celtic Christians? I'll tell you what we do. We tell them, you better get straightened out, or else you're going down. And that's not the way it works if you want to get people. Because they got the word. Did you know those people from Rome are getting around here? And he reaches out to him. He says, I think I like you, but I also think we've got some issues we need to work out. And you know how it is, an ecumenical conference, kumbaya, I think I love you, all of that. Not so much with St. Augustine, because St. Augustine is basically saying to these Celts, you know, you people are way out of line. We need for you to change over. And how bad was it? Well, thank you for asking. It was so bad that when the Celtic Christian leaders walked in, Augustine didn't stand up. Hurtful, insulting. And I mean, it's not like he's saying, you know, we have some differences. We can work it out. All we wanted you to know is we love you very much. Hug, hug, kiss, kiss. And how to win friends and influence people. Dale Carnegie, many centuries later, had a different approach. But Dale, St. Augustine really offended them, and as a result, the progress would be very, very slow. I think that's a good place for us to end, and I'll pick up with that next week. Thank you all very much. Thank you.